Hello there and welcome. I'm Barbara Opall Rome and this is Strictly Security, your weekly look into defense, technology, and strategic affairs. In this edition, we'll delve into the volatile situation on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, what Muslims the world over call Haram al-Sharif. We'll hear what experts have to say about the crisis averted this week after a fatal incident in the Israeli embassy compound in Amman. We'll sit down with Uzi Arad, a former Israeli national security advisor, to talk security, strategy, oversight, and the corruption threatening the government of Prime Minister Netanyahu. And Ron Levy's Cyber Corner will take you into the sinister world of the dark web. But first, let's begin with Lauren Izzo and her top 5 security facts for the week. Lauren?
Hi, Barbara. Here are your top 5 security facts we learned this week. A comprehensive review of Israeli defense industry relationships is expected to get underway. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman insisted on the review as a result of the ongoing corruption scandal dubbed Case 3000. The review will be conducted by a special advisory committee headed by Hila Gertzel. She's a retired district court judge. The panel will probe the commercial and business connections of retired military officers and Ministry of Defense officials. It will examine their ties to Israel's defense establishment and vice versa. The scandal has already implicated a former Israeli Navy commander and deputy national security advisor who is also a retired Navy officer. Also, the Israeli agent of the German submarine company, a former Navy officer, is in police custody as a key suspect in the ongoing probe, but now has negotiated to turn state's evidence. Moving now to number 2, an Elbit Systems of America integrated fixed tower border security system passed U.S. Customs and Border Protection Systems acceptance testing. This is the American leg of Israel's Elbit Systems. The system, located in Douglas, Arizona, marks the company's second successful deployment of the system, with the first also in a different area of Arizona. Elbit Systems of America furnishes the sensor towers with radar, cameras, and command and control software. And now number 3, a U.S. Navy ship fired warning shots when an Iranian vessel in the Gulf came within 150 yards this week. This is the first such incident since President Donald Trump took office back in January. A U.S. official speaking on condition of anonymity said the patrol craft named Thunderbolt fired the warning shots after the Iranian vessel approached at high speed and ignored radio calls, flares, and the ship's whistle. The Thunderbolt was accompanied by several U.S. Coast Guard vessels as well. The Iranian vessel appeared to be from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard, the official said, adding that it was armed but that the weapons were unmanned. Iran's Navy confirmed the report in a statement. And now let's move on to number 4. 2 Israeli-built satellites will be launched into orbit on August 2nd. The Advanced Observation Satellite OPSAT 3000, designed for the use of the Italian Ministry of Defense, and the Vegetation and Environmental Monitoring Satellite, or Venus, is the world's smallest of its kind, built at IAI in coordination with the French Space Agency. The satellites will be launched into space together, carried on the Arianespace Vega European launcher from the Kourou launch site in France. Venus will be the first environmental satellite produced by Israel. Israeli Science and Technology Minister Ophir Akunis called the upcoming launch an important national event. And finally, moving on to number 5, China is calling for constructive effort this week after U.S. officials said they have seen increased North Korean activity that could be preparations for another missile test within days. Speaking in Beijing, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lu Kang said he was aware of the reports and urged all sides to exercise restraint for the broad situation of peace and stability on the Korean peninsula. And there you have it, our top 5 security facts this week. Back to you, Barbara.
Thanks, Lauren. Coming up after the break, what can Israel and all peace-loving stakeholders do to diffuse tensions over the Temple Mount? Experts here and in Ramallah are standing by. Welcome back. For this week's Think Tank Central, I'm joined by Gilad Sher, an attorney, IDF reserve colonel, former peace negotiator, and senior fellow with Israel's INSS. And from Ramallah, Mohammed Najib, with decades of experience reporting on the conflict. Gilad, welcome.
Hi, Barbara.
And let's start with Jordan's special role on the Temple Mount and who's responsible for security up there, according to the 94 peace treaty.
The 1994 peace treaty between Jordan and Israel recognizes Jordan's special role in the holy shrines, Muslim holy shrines, and also protects this role in future permanent status negotiations. In any agreement in the future, this Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan's special role is recognized. Now,
security.
In terms of security, for all practical purposes, Israel is responsible for the security there. However, officially, I would say the Waqf.
The Islamic Trust.
Exactly.
Let's move it over to Mohammed. And can you tell us what was so offensive to so many in the Islamic world of these metal detectors? And now that they're removed, do you think it will be enough to calm the situation?
Yes, Barbara. The Palestinian says it's not about metal detector itself. It's about the Israeli move to enhance its control over Al-Aqsa mosque, which is considered for Palestinians, and they think this is their mosque, and Israel shouldn't divide it because they see this step will be followed by more steps, as they did in Al-Haram al-Ibrahimi in Hebron in 1994 when they divided between Muslims and Jews. So if they accept such a step today, they are sure it will be followed by more steps to enhance the Israeli control. When I asked the people who are gathering there, they said if the Israelis want to grow flowers here, we don't want their flowers. We don't want their metal detectors. We don't want their cameras. They cannot restrict who can pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque and who cannot pray.
I understand. Mohammed, let's stop here because this was all about preserving status quo. And Gilad, the attorney and the negotiator, tell us, is there a universally accepted definition of the status quo, or will people use it to their own ends?
Of course not. But the fact of the matter is that for the last 50 years, since 1967, Israel preserved a kind of status quo that allows for the freedom of worship and freedom of religion for all believers of all three monotheistic religions. And for the question of the metal detectors, you know, this is a technical question. You can justify it for security considerations, and you can say that it was a deficient decision taken on the ground of domestic politics.
Well, let's start here. Was the Israeli government negligent and grossly underestimating the outrage this would cause?
I believe that the decision-making process here was not flawless. And
very diplomatic of you.
Right. And that there could be a more thoroughly researched decision-making process in accordance with all kinds of more subdued diplomacy than just a public announcement of the immediate step taken after the terrorist attack on Temple Mount.
Let's throw it back to Mohammed because please tell us about the mood in the Palestinian street in the West Bank, at least, and are people there fed up enough to go for a third intifada, or do many feel they're being manipulated and used to start a religious war?
The Palestinians don't want to go for a third intifada. They call for non-violence protestation. But also, during the last use of force by the Israeli police to disperse those thousands who gathered in front of Al-Aqsa and were praying in the street, 5 Palestinians have been killed, 700 injured, and the protestation continues because the Palestinians said the removal of the metal detector are not enough because the Israeli police is planning to install cameras to monitor who's entered inside Al-Aqsa. They called for rejection of those measures, and they want the situation to be returned to before 14 July when the attack took place. So they said no cameras, no metal detectors, no manual search, no restriction of who enter to pray at Al-Aqsa and who not enter.
Gilad, and I know that the Palestinian issue and the Jordanian issue is so intertwined. Going back to the incident at the shooting in the Israeli embassy compound in Amman, is the king threatened by this populist outrage over security cooperation with Israel?
Sure. I think that whatever happened in the Middle East is always interrelated and intertwined. Whatever happened in the Temple Mount has the risk of turning this political conflict into a religious war. But happily, I believe we can say that the crisis over this shooting in Amman has been contained, and rapidly so. So yes, he is definitely challenged by a populistic oppressed. He is definitely challenged by the changing fabric of the socio-economic society in...
And they're burdened with refugees.
Exactly.
I have to tell you, we personally turned to at least 7 Jordanian experts to come on this program, and they were unwilling to appear on an Israel-based network or with an Israeli.
I can understand that.
Very
I can
shocking.
understand that. It's not shocking. That's the way it is, because everything goes public immediately, and this kind of crisis should be taken care of behind closed doors.
Well, let's talk about how the Prime Minister was handling this crisis. It was diffused very rapidly, as you noted, yet the Israeli security guard who shot 2 Jordanians, one completely innocent and one was a teenager with a screwdriver, he welcomed him on the cameras, bear hug.
Well, you have a saying, you know, that a stone thrown by a fool into a well, 100 wise men cannot pull out. Okay?
I love that.
So I'm not finger pointing or assigning blames to one party or the other. I think that altogether this crisis was eventually, and in hindsight, well treated afterwards, not before it happened.
Very hot, violent summer, or do you think things are going to calm down?
I hope that once there is a clear political horizon for all parties concerned that leads towards a two-state reality gradually, even in the absence of a two-state solution right now, a comprehensive one, I hope that with a political horizon we would be able to contain this kind of erupting populistic...
Gilad, you're very optimistic. Well, let's end on that note. To Mohammed Najib, Gilad Sher, thank you so much. And we'll be right back after this short break with a report on how Israel works to contain riots before they bubble over into enormous bloodshed. Don't go away. We're back. Thanks for staying put. Here's Glenn Field's report from the field on Israeli methods of riot control. Let's watch.
Riots, a frequent occurrence in the conflict between Israel and its Arab civilians. In the aftermath of Israel placing a metal detector at the entrances to the Temple Mount as a response to a terror attack on July 14th, in which 3 Arab Israelis shot dead 2 Israeli police officers with guns smuggled into the holy site. Palestinian protests turned into riots against the new security restrictions. The Temple Mount is considered to be the 3rd holiest site in Islam and the #1 holiest site in Judaism, making it a contentious hotspot. Just last weekend, the clashes left 4 Palestinians dead and 282 injured, according to the Red Crescent Cross.
This is a very sensitive situation here. From here, the peace is beginning. And from here, the peace is ending.
In addition to the escalating clashes, Fatah called for a day of rage, further igniting the violence, which led to a massacre in cold blood of 3 Israelis in their home. Prime Minister Netanyahu responded by referring to the assailants as animals and promising a swift and harsh action. Meanwhile, clashes between the police and the Arab population continue.
Al-Aqsa is ours and we are for it, and whatever happens to Al-Aqsa will happen to us. We and all of Palestine and the youth of Palestine belong to Al-Aqsa, and whatever Al-Aqsa will need from us, we will do it.
We met with Israeli police spokesperson Mickey Rosenfeld to discuss the police strategy in handling these riots.
Well, a full-scale riot would be hundreds of local residents, the majority of them being 16, 17, 18 and upwards, that would be masked, wearing kafirs. They would leave the different pathways and make their way up towards French Hill and try and make their way to the first line, which is where we are, where our border police units.
During these riots, you can see rocks thrown, tires inflamed, and Molotov cocktails, all directed at the police. Riots often break out due to unresolved tension between the Arab communities and the State of Israel.
Since October 2015, we've seen a wave of terrorist attacks across Jerusalem and across Judea and Samaria around the Gush Etzion area. At the same time, we've seen disturbances that have taken place inside the Israeli Arab villages, part of the tensions that exist.
The tactics used include non-lethal weapons such as soft bullets, stun grenades, water cannons, cement blocks strategically placed as roadblocks to contain the riot, and skunk water, water shot from a cannon but leaves behind a foul odor similar to that of a skunk.
Our aim is to contain the riot, make arrests, and give a rapid response to all incidents that can take place.
Hani Asawi and Darwish are elders of the community and organizers of Isawiya, whose families date back to the village for many generations, if not centuries.
Most of the clashes occurred inside the neighborhood when the police entered.
But despite the preparation and the tactics, Hani and Darwish claim that the mere presence of the Israeli police ignite the riots in the first place. And the tactics the police use, they say, are taken to extremes, such as spraying skunk water into homes, causing weeks of inconvenience in cleaning.
Most of the time, the police enter the village in order to destroy homes or to arrest children. When they arrive in the village, most police officers are provoking the children and initiating the clashes with them. During Ramadan, instead of helping us, they used to come 1 or 2 hours before we break fast and then throw stun grenades and tear gas. It harms the elders and prevents them from joining the break fast. Sometimes they even prevent them from going to the mosque. It is not appropriate behavior for police.
The police attribute social media and a limited amount of options for the youth to invest their time in a positive way as the primary reason for the disturbances.
Social media today is being used as a fundamental basis, as a platform, in order to put out information within the community. And I'm talking about by youngsters, by teenagers, instead of going out to a pub on Friday night or on a Thursday night over the weekend and spending time together and going out and enjoying, they're involved in riots or disturbances that take place. And that is something that we are dealing with all the time.
There is no raids, there is no clashes which the youth begin.
As in history, the narrative of what is taking place on the ground on a day-to-day basis varies depending on which side you speak to. Essentially, it is two different worlds. And during and in the aftermath of riots and other confrontations, there is no difference.
For our main interview this week, we're delighted to be joined by Uzi Arad, a former high-ranking Mossad intelligence official and head of Israel's National Security Council, who doesn't pull punches when he thinks leaders are putting their own interests ahead of the good of the state. Here's an abbreviated version of his distinguished career.
Professor Uzi Arad is an Israeli strategist and a well-known figure in foreign policy, security, and strategic circles in Israel and abroad. He is a professor at the Lauder School of Government, Diplomacy, and Strategy at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, and he's the chairman of Israel's Institute of Defense Studies. Born in Tiberias in 1947, Uzi Arad followed his family to France before traveling to Mexico in 1963. While in Mexico, he studied economics and anthropology at the University of the Americas. 3 years later, he returned to to Israel to carry out his military service in the Israeli Air Force. In 1975, Arad was offered a position with the Israeli Mossad and with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He chose to join the Mossad, where he spent most of his professional career. Between 1997 and 1999, Arad was foreign policy advisor to Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, in which he served for more than 2 decades, culminating in his tenure as Director of Research. In April 2009, he was appointed National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel and head of the Israeli National Security Council. He publicly opposed former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon's withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and was recently quoted saying that he had previously warned Prime Minister Netanyahu about corruption, referring to Israel's agreement with Germany to buy top-of-the-line submarines and patrol vessels, an ongoing investigation in Israel known as Case 3000.
We'll take a short break and be right back with Uzi Arad. Don't go away. Welcome back. We're here with Uzi Arad. Uzi, welcome.
It's good to be back here.
Your latest book, and if we can get a shot on it, it's translated NSC, The Struggle to Create and Transform the National Security Council. And in it, you talk about Israel's long and winding road to establishing an effective and empowered organization within the Prime Minister's office, very similar to what they have in the U.S. and the U.K. Yet, nearly a decade after that 2008 NSC law, Israel's decision-making process seems rife with problems. And let's talk about the recent crisis on the Temple Mount.
Well, you know, in all institutions and all organizations do not have a linear progression. Often it's cyclical. Sometimes agencies have better times, depending on circumstances, leaders, presidents, and sometimes they have worse times. And I did not expect the rise and upgrading of the Israeli NSC to continue indefinitely. So there was a good progression between the enactment of the law in 2008 and for the first 5 years under my rule and my successors' rule, who did even better. But something happened after that, which had to do with choices and priorities of the Prime Minister, and he, in fact, reversed the course. From upgrading, he downgraded, and that had been seen in the seniority of the people that he chose to head that body. Right. They were not as senior as their predecessors. It showed in his neglect of that body. And when you do not operate and benefit of the body, then it does underperform.
Well, why do you think he wanted to weaken the very body that he pressed so hard for? He seemed to be very supportive of at the beginning.
Well, he was more supportive than previous prime ministers, but he was also half-hearted about it. There are many reasons. As we say, it's complicated, and Israeli politics is not a simple thing. But let me give you an example. He sometimes said that he wants to have pluralism, he doesn't want to have concentration of power. And he also, actually, he does not want to be responsible for things. If things go wrong, and the NSC has been found in dereliction, then it is the Prime Minister head who's going to roll. If it is the Defense Ministry, it is so much more convenient.
Right, so accountability is a deterrent.
Political expediency, the spirit of the times led to the fact that the NSC is now eclipsed, and it shows, as you say, in the shoddy performance in both the war in Gaza, the 2014, where you saw mismanagement, and now it's the same problem.
Well, it's interesting that since January of 2016, Israel has not had a head of the National Security Council. Netanyahu's choice of Ariel Bar Yosef, a retired one-star admiral, was forced to resign because of conflict of interest, and now he's in police custody over this Case 3000 Navy procurement scandal. Well, where's the oversight? I mean, this guy was deputy of the NSC.
He was my deputy. Well, I'm negligent in the fact that I didn't check him through. I was too eager to staff the positions. But then he went on to serve under General Amidor and under Yossi Cohen, and all of them did not notice that the man apparently is still under suspicion. He's not been brought to trial, but there has been possibly mismanagement, and that is tragic because Netanyahu did appoint him, and had not been there a complaint against him, we would have had him now as the head of the NSC. Instead, we have a very sad event in Israel, the investigation of suspicions of corruption at high places, and that's a very unpleasant situation to be in. Right. In addition to the flaws in ethics, this affects Israel's security.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. Is this a matter of potential criminal offenses, political military offenses, or a combination of the two?
It is a combination of the two. Because, you know, it is one thing to profit by taking bribes in things which are civilian. Nobody gets killed. At best, I mean, it's a waste of time, of the taxpayers' money, and so forth. But when such things happen, when it concerns the major weapon systems of a nation, right, submarines, then it must have an effect. It certainly is wasteful. Sometimes it leads to a wrong choice of projects, and that is why I take it so seriously. In fact, I was shocked by the most recent revelations.
Well, you were quoted in the Israeli media that this could be the tip of the iceberg, and it could lead up to the prime minister.
To his office, for sure. I mean, those very close to him had been implicated. His private lawyer, who is involved in so many things, had turned out to be, in fact, a lawyer acting on behalf of the interest of the German company.
German shipyard.
No, that's called chutzpah. And so that is a tragic thing. And I'm really very, very annoyed. I think many Israelis would be annoyed. But let's hope that this would lead to a process of combating corruption in a much more serious way than we have been doing.
Former Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon believes that this is all going to end with a commission of inquiry and an indictment of Netanyahu.
Could be.
You don't rule that out?
No, of course not. I'm not ruling it out. Let me give you a point which would be interesting to know. Look, the German government had said that the submarine deal, the order of those 3 submarines, would go through if there is no shadow of corruption.
And indeed, now it's suspended.
So it is suspended, but it is in Israel's interest, in Netanyahu's interest, to clear the doubts. So he should be the first to go ahead in order to locate whatever pockets of corruption, have them removed, and then come with a clean slate to the German and said, no corruption, it's been dealt with, now please supply the submarines. Now what does he do? Instead,
obfuscates.
He obfuscates and he says, corruption? There's been no corruption.
Very suspicious. Let's talk about Iran.
He's putting in jeopardy the submarine deal.
Yes. Well, how essential is that submarine deal to Israeli national security? There were claims by the former Prime Minister Olmert, who himself was just released from prison over corruption, that Netanyahu and Ehud Barak wasted 11 billion shekels worth of taxpayer money on...
That takes us into the subject of strategy on Iran. Right. Israel did want to have an option for a unilateral preemptive strike if it came to it. It did hope that Iran would contain and stop its nuclear program, that it would do under the pressure of the sanctions or anything. But if all else failed, then as a last resort, even if the other powers did not take action, Israel was ready to do that, arguing also that if it did have a credible strike force, that would coerce the Iranians into accepting a negotiated deal. So the more you have it, the less you would have to use it.
Have to use it, like insurance.
So it was a justified thing to invest in it. But then the question is, why wasn't it used at all? We don't know. History will tell.
Now, you analyze this.
Now, it looks as if the only thing that would justify the increase of the Israeli arsenal of submarines from 6 to 9 is if there has been a revised threat assessment in Israel, which did indicate that the Iranian nuclear threat may be coming earlier or being bigger than previously thought. That could have justified an increase to such proportions. But I'm not aware. I'm not aware that there has been such a threat assessment.
Well, now
so why indeed that has then taken place? That's a big question.
Finally, as pertaining to the threat assessment, in your book, you recommend that Israel should establish a National Intelligence Council for strategic intelligence for such assessments. Please explain.
Well, that's another thing which is complicated. Israel, which is the country which is burdened with so many foreign policy and military threats, has never had a really centralized, integrated national assessment body. America has, Britain has, all kinds of countries do have their system. We do not. What we do have is the primacy of the military. But it is not an integrated, it's not a national intelligence. It is the military assessment as the primary supplier. Now, it is not very healthy that the military are the ones who do assessments of political and civilian things. You know, I would rather have a civilian body doing that, which may include many military. So we don't have it. And again, it shows that there is no integration at the top. It shows that the cabinet has not received sufficient intelligence. After all, as you noted, the war in 2014, when was it? The Gaza thing.
Uzi, we have to stop you here. I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Barbara.
And after the break, we'll be back with a look at counter-terror training camps for tourists. Are they an extreme way for the whole family to experience Israel? Or is it crass commercialization of the ever-present threat? You decide. Welcome back. Extreme sport, family togetherness, or a cynical way to make money off the ever-present threat? Lauren Izzo spent time at a counter-terror training camp for tourists and brought back this report. Let's take a look.
Terrorism has sent shockwaves around the world, and it continues to do so. People are understandably looking for ways to defend themselves. Who better to learn from than the Israeli army? Tucked away in the scenic hills of the West Bank, former IDF combat soldiers and officers offer basic but theatrical defense and attack speed courses for all ages and any occasion.
For a lot of them, it's an attraction, meaning kind of an extreme attraction.
The Caliber 3 Counterterrorism Institute is a facility founded by a former Israeli army officer. It teaches tourists how to stop a terror attack, or rather, how an Israeli soldier would stop a terror attack. The 2-hour training program can include anything from simulated terror attacks to self-defense, shooting, and more. Open to the public for 9 years now, the facility has hosted more than 500,000 tourists from several countries, including the US, Canada, Mexico, and even China. The band Aerosmith was there just last month following their concert in Tel Aviv's Hayarkon Park. The founder of Caliber 3, Sharon Gat, says they show customers the real-life version of movie plots.
The main reason we're here is the bar mitzvah of my grandson Elias. We wanted to have the experience and live a little bit like you live every day. Even more for the children, for them to understand that this is not a Hollywood movie, it's real life.
The tour begins with a briefing from a fully armed soldier about the importance of this experience to Jews and friends of Israel. We weren't allowed to record it, but here's the gist of it.
Some of the Jewish people are expecting to get some Jewish pride, you know. Let's say there was a Jew sitting in Auschwitz in 1942. Could he ever imagine that one day the Jewish people will have a country and will have a state and will have an army and security forces that will protect them?
The two groups today are both Jewish, on bar mitzvah trips. A family of 4 Americans and an entire extended family of 18 Mexicans, all wearing matching t-shirts. Ages range from around 10 to well over 70. They then separate the group so that those over 18 can shoot a real gun, while the kids had to learn on wooden rifles and paintball guns. Yes, that's right, the kids learned how to shoot too.
I went to shoot.
You went to shoot?
Yes.
Was it fun?
Yes.
What was the coolest thing about today?
The shooting.
But the parents didn't seem to mind.
For us, really, this was the highlight. Incredible.
An image of children with fabricated weapons is not the most flattering for Israel's PR, which is why we weren't allowed to film this portion of the program.
The kids over here are shooting only paintball guns. They're doing it very safely. This is done everywhere in the world. We're just giving them informative information of the situation here in Israel I don't think there's any wrong in that.
While this is a private company, the instructors are dressed in full military uniforms and they teach IDF techniques, building their business on the reputation of the IDF and its experience fighting terror. Sharon Gatt says Caliber 3 is for everyone from every ethnic and political background.
You can say that we're getting everybody. We're getting Jews and non-Jews. We're getting men, women, and children. We're getting old people, young people. We're getting right-wingers and left-wingers. Anybody that you can think of comes over here.
But their customers are mostly Jewish tourists coming for the thrill. The West Bank location of the facility, as well as the concept of the program, is not lost on its critics. That, however, does not stop the flow of customers.
It doesn't have anything to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's how we fight terror. It can be terror in Israel, it can be terror in America, it can be terror in France, it can be terror anywhere in the world. 100% non-political.
Controversial or not, and political or not, there's no doubt that people are afraid of terrorists, and that means big business for places like Caliber 3.
With 3 facilities already open in Israel and 2 more opening up in the United States, it looks like military tourism could be the next big thing. Lauren Izzo, I24NEWS, Caliber 3.
And for this week's Forgotten Wars segment, Glenn Field looks at the rise and fall of the Islamic State in post-Gaddafi Libya. Let's watch.
After 3 years of battling the Islamic State, victory has finally been claimed by Benghazi's area-leading militia in Libya.
It's been going since 1989. ISIS knows us well, terrorists know us well, and we continue to bear the responsibility because of these martyrs killed in the fighting. May God rest their souls in peace.
The taking of Benghazi was announced by commander of rebel troops Khalifa Hifter, who made a point to note that the additional capturing of Azawiyah and Zarawa are key for recapturing Tripoli.
Everything is in order in the western area.
The conflict in Libya began during the 2011 Arab Spring, in which the Libyan people held an uprising against their leader, Muammar Gaddafi, in which Gaddafi was about to conduct an airstrike against his own people, but was prevented by an international no-fly zone led by the U.S. The Libyan dictator was eventually brought down and in broad daylight mutilated to death by rebel forces. Gaddafi's downfall created a huge power vacuum, which was soon filled by Islamic fundamentalist factions, predominantly the Islamic State. However, just recently, the Islamic State too has fallen by the very sword they took power with. Does not mean that the fighting has ended. Warring factions are still jostling for power, prolonging the civil unrest. The ongoing violence has perpetuated the refugee crisis out of North Africa. Relief organizations are running thin, trying to coordinate with one another in accommodating the influx of refugees.
The idea behind this code of conduct is how to make our relations more functional on the ground and better coordinated.
The crisis has prompted European leaders such as French President Emmanuel Macron to convene face-to-face talks between the leaders of the rival Libyan factions to bring peace and political stability in Libya. Despite these efforts, they are too premature to have any indication as what kind of impact an international intervention could have when the warring factions are embedded in their tribal roots.
We'll take one last commercial break, and when we return, our resident cyber expert will take us into the sinister world of the dark web. Don't go anywhere. We're back with Ram Levy. Ram, welcome.
Hi, Bob.
So tell us about this dark web, and is it something for normative, law-abiding people to be worried about?
Well, when most of us access the internet, we access what we call the surface web. It's the web that's accessible by us, by normal surfers like Chrome and Explorer, and it is accessible by the robots that are doing the search indexing. Underneath the surface web, there's the deep web that you need passwords and special anonymizers or protocols to access. Part of the deep web is the darknet. That's where most of the criminal illicit trade is happening. The deep web has marketplaces just like eBay, but for criminals, where illegal supply meets the illegal demand. And since crime is the biggest issue on cyberspace today, that's where law enforcement agencies are putting a lot of efforts to take those marketplaces down. Last week, an FBI-led operation codenamed Bayonet has managed to bring down two of the most important marketplaces in the world. One of them is called Alphabay, and the other one is called Hansa. In Alphabay, there were more than 250 listings of illegal things like fake IDs, drugs, guns, malware as a service, crime as a service, and with almost over 40,000 vendors supplying almost 250,000 users that were trading in were busy in illicit trade. What's interesting was this marketplace was online for less than 2 years. The founder was caught in Bangkok. He had more than $22.5 million in assets that were seized by the U.S. law enforcement. And just in comparison, 2 years ago, Silk Road Marketplace was brought down. Silk Road had almost 14,000 listings. We're speaking about 20 times more listings just 2 years later. Now, after the FBI took down Alphabay, most of the users moved from Alphabay to Hansa. Hansa was monitored for a very long time by the Dutch police. So when the users moved from Alphabay to Hansa, the Dutch police was able to see who's moving from Alphabay to Hansa, what kind of illicit trade they're doing, what are they buying, who they're selling to, and give this information, this very valuable information and intelligence, to law enforcement agencies around the world.
And kudos to the law enforcement agencies.
Absolutely, yeah. It is a small step, but a very important step forward. What Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, called one of the most important criminal investigations of the year. It's a small step forward to making cyberspace a much safer place.
Wow. Ram, thank you so much.
Thank you very
much. And we look forward to the next Cyber Corner.
Stay safe.
And now it's time for my last word on Israeli military censorship, which was manifest to a ridiculous degree during this week's shooting in the Jordanian capital, following a weekend of bloody clashes on Jerusalem's Temple Mount. Many may be surprised to learn that Israel, a self-acclaimed bastion of democracy, maintains a system of military censorship that predates the founding of the Jewish state. These 1945 British-era emergency regulations require media outlets to submit, prior to publication, any print or broadcast report on any topic it deems could pose harm to national security. In recent years, Israel's military censor has broadened its net to include Twitter, Facebook, blogs, and chat groups. Now, on Sunday evening, when news started to flow from Amman about an attack near the Israeli embassy, journalists here got text messages warning them of a total blackout on unfolding events. And while Reuters, CNN, Fox, Al Jazeera, and others provided blow-by-blow coverage of an Israeli security officer who killed 2 Jordanians and then fled to the adjacent embassy, news from Israel was banned for 11 straight hours, a near eternity in news cycle time. It wasn't until Monday morning, with a mob threatening the Israeli embassy in Amman, that the censor permitted reporting from here, in large part to finally disseminate its version of events, which insisted that the security guard fired 2 shots in self-defense after being stabbed by a Jordanian teen. Aside from the regrettable loss of Jordanian life, one completely innocent and one that should have been neutralized rather than killed, this episode served as a blessing in disguise, transforming a potential crisis in Israeli-Jordanian ties into an opportunity that allowed Israel to remove, at Jordan's demand, metal detectors installed on the Mount following a deadly shooting that killed 2 Israeli policemen. But the episode also illustrates Israel's ultimately self-defeating policy of muzzling the media in an age of instant global connectivity. Responsible news organizations have no problem withholding news when lives are at risk or next of kin need to be notified. But when events are broadcast live by dozens of outlets for all the world to see, it's folly for authorities here to hide behind anachronistic, pre-state emergency regulations. And that's my last word. Please join us again next week for a new edition of Strictly Security at i24 News. And until then, wishing you a safe and pleasant evening from the Jaffa Port.